So these stories are back to back in all three of the accounts. And they just collected a bunch of fish and a bunch of loaves. And why were the disciples even going out in the boat? I know I'm talking from American. I'm just wondering, because number one, they were called from being fishermen to being followers of Christ and going along with them.
Maybe they're escaping the crowd. Maybe they're escaping the crowd.
Okay.
Maybe they're escaping the crowd. It's actually different, Mary, in each narrative. In John, the disciples don't understand. When Jesus refuses to be made into a king in John, they just leave when it's night. Jesus is up on the mountain. They leave. The disciples leave the crowd. I don't think they, at that point in the narrative, the disciples don't really understand much in the fourth gospel until after the resurrection. That's also true in the synoptics, but it's just different. It's in each gospel account, you see how the details are a little different. In John, they receive Jesus, and you know that is Johannine anti-language for that's a good thing, right? To receive him. To those who received him, right? Who believed into his name, he gave the exousion, the power, the authority power to become teknotheu. Well, they received him in John. But in Mark, in the Markan version of the walking on the sea story, they let him in the boat, but their hearts were hardened. They don't understand. They don't get it. In the Markan narrative, try to understand. None of these stories are 21st century Western biographies. None of them. They're theological portraits, and you have to read them according to their own theological. You have to read these texts really whole. They're not meant to be chipped away at, ripping little verses, bleeding out of passages. That's why I can't stand. I have a very hard time when somebody quotes to me a Bible verse. You just quoted from 2 Timothy. Do you understand what do you understand about the entirety of the letter that you're quoting me from? What was the purpose? What was the context? What's the purpose behind the author? Who is he writing to? Where was he writing? What was the time period? When in the first century? How many years after the death and resurrection of Jesus is this letter being written? Oh, I don't know any of that. That's not it. And then usually what the answer comes is, well, that's not important. Oh, that's not important. If I say fire, do you think it's important that you understand what I mean by that? That's only one word, baby. We're talking about a sentence you just ripped out of a book, out of a library, and you don't understand the context. Your brain and my brain, guaranteed, is going to hates vacuums. We're going to fill in those vacuums of understanding with our own cultural understanding, alien and foreign to ancient Middle East. Right? It makes sense. And we're not going to understand, we're going to distort. Anybody else? Yes, Joe.
I'm a little confused. Are you telling me that, before I ask my question, are you telling me that Jesus walked on the water?
Nope.
Are you telling me it's a myth and we should...
Nope, that's not a myth. I'm not telling you he walked on water.
Then what are you telling me?
I'm telling you he walked on the sea.
Okay, fine. Sea, as far as I'm concerned, here in the 21st century America, is water.
It's not water in the Bible. It's not H2O. It's a person. And so in order to be respectful of the author, we have to read what the author is telling us. You'll see why later. You'll see why later if you're open, Joe. But if you're not open, brother, to see this is the thing. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not selling you anything. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, Joe. I leave that for other people to do that with you. I'm not into that. I'm into doing this. What was the purpose of this class at the beginning? Every time we do one of these classes, I list what the purpose of the study was. What was the first purpose of today's study? To offer a culturally sensitive interpretation of these texts. so that we can respect the author and hear the text as the original audience would have. Joe, were the original audience 21st century Western people? Were the text, Joe, that's a simple question, brother. Were the stories written for, by, or about Americans? Can anyone answer me that?
No. Nothing.
No. So then we have to try to take off the American glasses just for a minute, brother, and put on ancient Middle Eastern Mediterranean glasses. Because if we do that, then we're being respectful. Then we can spiritualize. Then we can talk about, well, how does it apply to me living today? Does it? Can it? We can address that. Can I even believe it? We can talk about that later. But those are our agenda questions. Let's take those, let's be, first of all, respectful to the biblical ancestors we have in the faith. I think that's fair. Is that a fair thing to ask? Let's read it in context. Yes, Lucy.
I think they were afraid.
Why were they afraid?
Well, they were afraid because they didn't understand, I think. Yeah, like they're not, like, because at that time they didn't, their culture saw the spirits and the water like something else. Do you know what I'm saying? And those are things like you don't mess with. And I think they were having a problem with the whole thing. So, you know, maybe when he came up on them, they were scared.
Maybe.
You know, afraid.
Let's see why they were frightened. We're going to go back into that. Let's keep going.
One other
Yeah,
thought
sure.
is that if he even was able to get out to them so far
Yeah.
on the sea, two of the accounts say that they were a couple miles out.
3 to 4 in the John 9 account.
Okay, so even if he weren't physically standing on top of the water and made his way out a couple miles to greet them somehow, isn't that, and not be engulfed with the waves, isn't that almost equal to having walked on the water if he conquered the distance and didn't succumb to it?
We're going to see. Have you ever gone into road trance
Yes.
when you travel?
Oh, yeah.
How come you can't remember, that's where you go drive somewhere or walk somewhere and you get there safely? You must have done all the movements okay because your body's in perfect condition. But you can't remember the intervening period? Why is that?
Because you were unaware.
Because your brain switches states of consciousness all the time, but we might not be aware of the switches. All right, so let's keep going. Let's first of all talk about seas known to biblical peoples. Keep in mind that all theology is analogy, and the biblical texts like John are theology. They're God talk. All theology is analogy. All God talk, even inspired, whatever that means, is God talk. All God talk is analogy. That is to say, everything human beings know and say about God is rooted in human experience. And all human experience is culturally specific. That means all human experience is culturally interpreted. That means all theology is culturally limited.
They were limited.
By their culture, which is very alien to ours, just like we are limited by our culture. Bible readers want to know which seas were familiar to the biblical peoples. Well, we have to start with the Great Sea, the Mediterranean. Even land-bound peasants knew of the Mediterranean, the Great Sea. In the Bible, the Mediterranean Sea is often referred to simply as Yam, Hayam, the sea, and sometimes the Great Sea. The psalmist presents a vivid description of how this body of water could turn violent and destructive. Psalm 29:3, the voice of Yahweh is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, Yahweh over the mighty waters. Because this watery presence loomed so large west of the land, this Hebrew word Yam for the sea also served as the designation for the compass designation west. See the Middle East? See the Levant, where Israel would be, and Phoenicia, way off on the, look towards the right corner of the screen, lower corner. See that, the Mediterranean? Everything in the land of Israel, west, is sea. So it makes notice how culture shapes how you communicate, Joe. Their word for west is the word for sea. You understand? Culture shapes how you can perceive, how you can understand things, how you can interpret things, and how you communicate. When you and I, as Americans, say West, the West, what do we think? Cowboys, Indians, going out to California way, right? The Northwest, perhaps, the Southwest, Tex-Mex, a whole bunch of things that happen, right? That's what we think when we think, go West, right? The great expansion after the Civil War and all that. Because culture shapes our reality too.
And those images.
Here's another sea. Among other seas mentioned in the Bible, the Sea of Reeds, usually translated badly as the Red Sea. It's just actually a marsh that was crossed by ancient Hebrews in the Exodus. Is difficult to locate exactly geographically. The sea located in the Arabah region south of Palestine, the deepest point of the surface on earth, is called by different names. The Salt Sea, the Sea of the Plain, or the Eastern Sea. Of course, we're talking about what is called today most often as the Dead Sea. Its high concentration of salt and other minerals permits no visible life to exist in it. Hence, there are microscopic life organisms, but no visible life. Hence, the ancient Roman name called it, the ancient Roman name was given to it, the Dead Sea. This name is deceptive because even though the sea is usually calm, occasionally severe and dangerous thunderstorms do develop. This is quite in keeping with the dense nature of this personified body of water. To our ancient ancestors, you and I may not look at these things as other than human persons, but everybody in the Old and New Testament did. Finally, there is the Sea of Galilee, which figures so prominently in the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels especially. Its most ancient name was Chinnereth, which is the Hebrew word for harp, perhaps describing its shape or the sound of the waters on it. In the Hellenistic and Roman periods, it was called Gennesaret. John calls it the Lake of Tiberias, Caesar, the emperor. Situated about 640 feet below sea level, its size today is 13 miles long and 8 miles wide at its widest part. John chapter 6, verse 18, the sea rose because a strong wind was blowing. You know that strong wind is considered an other than human person. Wind and spirit and breath are the same word in Hebrew and Greek. Pneuma in Greek, ruach in Hebrew. Of special interest is the wind pattern on the Sea of Galilee. Two large valleys on the west side usher in strong afternoon breezes from the west, particularly during the dry season, which is the end of April to the end of September. These can quickly churn up waves on the peaceful waters to a height of 7 or more feet. In the winter, the wet season, a similar wind pattern from the east can produce the same effect. So it's all, man, if you see the Sea of Galilee as a person, this is a person that is wild and rageful, right? Tempestuous. No experienced fisherman would sail in such storms, and if he were caught in a sudden squall, he would do everything possible to return to shore as quickly as possible. That's the Sea of Galilee, folks. Heavy windstorms are a common occurrence on the Sea of Galilee at certain times of the year, and the suddenness with which they can arise is truly astonishing. In antiquity, winds and seasons of the year were personified or attributed to certain invisible cosmic forces or powers. Hey, thanks for watching. Just continue the playlist for the next part of the study. If you have further questions, this is good. They will get addressed, so keep watching. If you found value, please subscribe, like, and share. As always, questions, comments, and criticisms are most welcome. God bless you.